I lived with my wife for 40 years. We got married when I was 20 and she was 19. During this time, like everyone else, there were quarrels and reconciliations. But I was sure that we didn't betray each other, and no matter what happened, she was there for me. We had 2 beautiful children, a son and a daughter. Now they are adults. Both have their own families. I'm a doctor and already retired, but this is a big word. I work part-time in a private clinic. I no longer do complex operations. I conduct a therapeutic appointment. My wife also still works as a designer. We have never denied ourselves anything and worked for our pleasure. Despite the fact that my wife is no longer young, she managed to preserve her natural beauty. She always took care of herself. She did sports and ate right. When we walked side by side, everyone thought that this was my young mistress and complimented my wife. I liked it, but as it turned out, I was happy about it in vain. It all happened one rainy evening. I was sitting at the table and sorting out documents. My wife was not at home. She went to get groceries to cook dinner for. And then, digging through the documents, I came across my wife's medical certificate, which spoke about pregnancy and premature birth. Looking at the date, I saw that it was a long time ago. At that time, I was on a business trip. As it turned out, she gave birth to a defective child who lived for a couple of days and died. At that moment, I was in such a state that a closet fell on my head. I can't be the father of this child. I sat for a long time and was silent. Then, I went out into the astral of my thoughts, and for a long time, I could not put them together. Only one thing kept repeating in my head. My wife was not faithful to me, but who is the father of this child? An hour ago, I thought I had a strong family, a loving wife, and now what? I couldn't believe it. For a long time, my soul was empty. In the end, I hid this certificate and thought that I should pull myself together and calm down. To be honest, I was thinking of making a scandal right after my wife returned, but first I wanted to sort everything out. Everything was clear with the children here. There was a difference of 9 years between them, and they seemed similar to me. There was no doubt that they were my children, but that didn't make it any easier for me. I couldn't understand why she did this to me. We got married for love. I took care of her for a long time. There were no other women for me. Although I had an attractive appearance and was not deprived of the attention of girls, throughout our life together, I have tried to surround my wife with care and attention. I have never had a bachelor life. My wife was everything to me and even more. My heart ached. I went out on the porch to get some fresh air. After a while, a car drove up to the neighboring house, from which my wife got out in a very good mood, followed by a man. He took the bags out of the trunk, kissed my wife on the cheek, got into his car, turned around and drove away. I abruptly went home and thought, yes, the further the merrier. Then the front door opened. She came in and shouted, "Is anyone home?" I barely restrained myself from making a showdown, calmly asked why it took so long. In response, I heard that I was visiting my friend. Well, we stayed too long. Her voice did not express any emotions. "I'm going to make something quick," she said, and kissed me, and I smelled alcohol. I calmly asked where you were driving, or did someone give you a ride? At that moment, she looked at me with a frightened look and did not know what to answer me. "Don't insist, I came by taxi," she replied. "And what's the problem?" "Yeah, we haven't had anything particularly close with the taxi driver since you kissed him goodbye," I replied. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed to me even she could hear it. To calm down, I got up and took out a bottle of whiskey. She looked at me in fright, and then she asked, "How do you know?" I saw everything that was happening at that moment, standing on the street in the courtyard of our house. So is a kiss a fair or what? She was standing there and didn't know what to say to me. I could barely contain my emotions. "Sit down," I said. "I have a conversation with you," and I took out a medical certificate from my briefcase. "Explain to me what it is. Explain to me what it is." I put the certificate on the table in front of her. She carefully sat down after looking through a couple of pages, abruptly pulled her hand away. Her eyes suddenly filled with tears. "What did you read?" she asked. I angrily asked the question, "Who were you pregnant with? Who is he?" She was silent for a while. I tried my best to drink, but I couldn't get rid of the lump in my throat. And then she replied that sooner or later you had to find out. It's even good that it happened now. In a calm voice, she said that while I was on a long business trip, she met a man she fell in love with. He was 11 years younger than her and clouded her mind. She couldn't help herself. Ran to him on a date, but quickly took the children to my mother, and he moved into my house. They began to live as husband and wife, and from unearthly love, she became pregnant from him. He proposed to her. My wife is a mother of 2 children. She even thought that I wouldn't come back and hoped for it, and everything would settle down by itself. But something didn't work. The baby was born prematurely and died. At that moment, she started crying. As I understood at that moment, she didn't care about our children. According to her, after his death, their feelings cooled down, and they began to move away from each other. Once upon a time, there was a young girl from whom her lover completely left. Having experienced this not happiness, she took the children and began to wait for me. When I returned, she met me as if nothing had happened and played the role of a loving and good wife for all the following years. I was in shock. To be honest, for a while, I couldn't say a word at all. I stared at the wall in silence. There wasn't a single thought in my head. Well, that's not all. 6 months ago, her lover appeared in our city and passion flared up between them again. It turns out she loved him all these years. In general, she wants to start a new life in which, alas, there is no place for me. She lived with me for 40 years, gave her best years, the children grew up, and now she wants to live with a loved one. Saying all this, she knew perfectly well that with every word, she was just killing me. Nothing personal. It's love. It's everything. You can exhale and drink, she said. I silently poured a glass of whiskey and drank it in one gulp, but it didn't even affect me. I decided to drink more and started drinking directly from the bottle. She sat, looked at me, and was silent. At that moment, I thought that I had been deceived for so many years. If I had not found the certificate, I would have continued to sit like a horned deer. I silently got up, picked up my bag, threw some things into it, and just as silently headed for the exit. "Where are you going?" she screamed. "You don't have to leave at night." I turned around and saw that she was standing with tears in her eyes. The poor girl got nervous. I silently shrugged my shoulders, opened the door, and went out, trying not to touch the door jamb with my hands. It was cool outside. I slung my bag over my shoulder and walked down the street. I wanted to smoke, although I quit smoking 20 years ago at the request of my wife. It was already too late. The windows of the houses were not lit, only the lanterns illuminated my path. Then the phone rang. I looked at it, turned off the phone, and put it in my pocket. I was overcome with such longing that I bit my lip with my teeth so as not to howl in despair. Only now I realized what had happened at all. What should I do? Where should I go? The easiest way is to slam the door with your head held high and leave. But where? To the children? They have enough problems. As it is, I've never had a mistress, probably in vain. It remains only to go to work, spend the night there, and make a decision in the morning. I was walking slowly among the black houses, and suddenly I heard someone shouting to me, "Man, do you have a cigarette?" Turning around, I saw my boss standing in a bright white light, who was certainly glad to see me. "Welcome back," he said. "Where am I?" Words came to me with difficulty. "Yes," he replied. "Yesterday you were taken to our clinic with a traumatic brain injury. All the documents were with you. The operation was successful, and you are with us again. We have informed your children and your wife, and your son will be here soon." Then the door opens and my son enters the ward. "Hi, how are you?" He kissed me on the cheek, carefully put the bag of groceries on the bedside table. And again, he said that you make us nervous. Mom has not been able to come yet because of urgent matters. I said she shouldn't have come. "Okay, just don't worry," he replied. It seems that my son was already aware of all the events. It is interesting that my wife told him that he did not love me. She lacked affection. As usual, what else can ex-wife say? Okay, enough snout. As one good person said, the past doesn't count. I was discharged after 2 weeks. She came to visit me twice, but I refused to see her. For the first time, I rented an apartment next to the hospital and quietly got used to the bachelor life. The breakup had a twofold effect on me. On the one hand, of course, the pain of betrayal, and on the other, some prospects are still unclear. The only thing I knew for sure was that I would no longer have relationships with women. Inoculation from new relationships was difficult. Then there was a divorce, and I was left not only without my wife, but also without my corner. The children took a neutral position, although it was clear that they were more on the mother's side. I started operating again, drowned out my mental pain and work, and I succeeded. About 3 months later, a friend called me and offered to meet. "Remember, you lent me a large sum of money?" he asked, and of course I remembered that he had big problems with business, and I couldn't just not help a friend. He settled his affairs, but was in no hurry to repay the debt. I didn't want to remind him because I knew that I would lose a friend. I had a rule: when you lend money to a friend, imagine that you give him this money as a gift, and if you appreciate this person, do not remind him. The time will come. He will give it himself if he can. I invested your money in the business, he continued, and my business went up the hill. Here's a bank card. This is my debt. Here's 5 times more than you lent me. Thank you. It was very convenient. I bought myself a cottage outside the city in a car. I didn't have time to do housework, and I hired an assistant. She was 15 years younger than me, a very young woman, but she had already managed to follow her husband. She lived with her ex-husband for almost 20 years. She had no children because of infertility, so her husband left her. I didn't have any plans for her. It's been almost 6 months. One day I was chopping wood, and I felt sick. I lost consciousness. Woke up in the hospital. Isabella was sitting next to me. She called an ambulance. When the doctors arrived, she was sitting with my head on her lap. After this incident, I began to look at her with different eyes and realized what a beautiful woman she was. Somehow our relationship developed into intimacy, and I asked her to marry me. After a short time, we signed. I knew that we could not have children in our intimate life, and I behaved uninhibitedly. One day she got sick, started vomiting, nausea. I got scared and took her to the clinic. What was my surprise when it turned out that she was pregnant? I only remember that she told me that I would keep the baby no matter what you told me. I hugged her tightly, kissed her, and realized one truth. If fate closes one door in front of my eyes, it immediately opens a new one. Life was getting better, and one day before the new year, my ex-wife called me. "We need to meet," she said in a plaintive voice. We met at a restaurant. She booked a table there. I was sitting across from her with all my appearance. She was full of remorse, and then I heard, "Forgive me. There wasn't a day that I didn't think about you," and her eyes began to fill with tears. "I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed all your children," she continued to say, and I sat in silence and looked at the woman I loved madly. A woman I would give my life for, a woman who didn't hesitate to betray me twice, the one who cut me out of her life and went to another man. And now she has come to her senses and is trying to come back to me. She kept telling me that the time spent without me gave her the realization of how much she loves me and that I was the only real man in her life. I'm sorry, she repeated like a spell, and I looked at her brightly painted mouth, which delighted my ears with such sweet words, and imagined her kissing her lover. Does she really think that I will believe her words? She found an excuse for her meanness and left me without hesitation. She fully managed to share the pleasure with her lover, having sex with him more than once. And now she's here to offer me what's left of her used by her lover. She realized that he needed her only for entertainment, as long as she had money. And she could not have a future with him now that there is no one to provide for her. Realizing all this, she crawled to me. God, do I really seem so stupid to her, and now I'm ready to believe this lie? I listened to her in silence. To be honest, I was not happy. I even felt humanly sorry for her. After all, we lived together for 40 years. It was time to end our meeting, and my phone rang. Isabella called me and asked where to pick me up. I gave the address and began to say goodbye. "Is this your woman?" she asked softly and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Yes," I replied. "How long have you been together?" "This has been the case for the last year and a half. This is love." I got up and went to the exit, turned around and said goodbye, and tried to be happy. She stood with her hands pressed to her chest and looked at me through the beautifully decorated window of the restaurant. People were walking around and laugh went on. On the other side, a Coca-Cola advertisement was shining brightly. "Drink and experience joy." A car drove up. I sat down and in a few minutes disappeared into the stream of cars that were going somewhere all the time. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. Please feel free to like, as well as subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, write your suggestions in the comments section about the story and what you would do if you ever find yourself in this situation. Take care.